Hi everyone, welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Jessie Poon. All right, so welcome. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Thank you, Annie, for inviting me. My name is Jessie Poon, and I'm a professor of economic geography at the University of Buffalo. Now, I know a lot of people don't know what an economic geography does, so I'm going to explain it a little bit. I think when you think about activities in space, economic activities in space in particular, they're never random. So you think of high tech as occurring in places like the Silicon Valley. So my job is trying to find out if you can have a Silicon Valley in Buffalo, what are the factors, for instance, that lead to the creation of a high-tech place like Silicon Valley, and what lessons can we learn from it, and can we transfer it to another place? So you can also say that for financial activities like Wall Street, well, all the financial activities down in Wall Street. So even information that we're going to talk about today is not completely random. It clusters, and so we look at these spatial patterns and we try to explain these patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how did you get into this field and what's like your favorite part of doing what you do now?
I always liked to read as a kid, really. I mean, I recall when I was like 10 and my neighbor had a box of books that he threw away on his sidewalk. And I just ran over and picked up the whole box of books. And I was so happy because after that, I was just reading all the time. So I was this kid that was very antisocial in the sense that I was always reading during dinner and during lunch, you know. But that was my passion. And then I like to write. And so it got me to this job because it lets me read and it lets me write.
Yeah, awesome. So, could you talk about the role of like information accuracy in like your field of research, particularly when it comes to uh like in your field of research, like the misinformation in your field.
Right. So let me begin by maybe thinking about truth, right? Because that was part of the question that you might be asking. I think that we need to step back a little and then unpack truth before we come to the question of misinformation,
Hmm.
because I think truth can be contested. So if you think about it, a year and a half ago when we were having COVID, there was this theory that was really popular. It was saying that the COVID virus came from laboratories, perhaps somewhere in Wuhan. And then everybody said that that was a conspiracy theory. And nobody thought it was truth or truthful. And then a year and a half later, we have the Department of Energy investigating the possibility. And then you have scientists coming out and say we should maybe think about this other alternative explanation. So what has changed? I think what is interesting for me is to think about truth as a series of maybe plausible explanations and plausible hypotheses. And then sometimes there's a lot of debate, and it's a dynamic process in the sense that it may take some time before we uncover it. So I think that truth in some sense is you got to be open and think of it as a tentative explanation. I think it's better to think of it this way so that you preempt the criticism that when things change, you say, oh, you were saying something untruthful, you know. So I think that's where I'm coming from. So I also need to unpack misinformation because I think that for as long as humans have existed, we have been very good at storytelling. So we are just born to be storytellers. So during the Roman times, people spread fake news. I mean, they spread fake news about political treason. In 1825, we had a newspaper in New York that was writing about human beings with wings and these unicorns that were roaming the moon. And everybody just picked up on that story, and every single newspaper picked up on that story, right? So it was very popular. And you go, why is it so popular? It's kind of not true. And then you have, but I think people just sometimes like to tell stories and are attracted to stories. And we do tell fibs too. So let me remind you that we tell our little kids, on Christmas Eve, that when they wake up the next morning, they're going to find presents in their socks, because Santa Claus is going to come down the chimney on Christmas Eve and fill their socks with presents, right? So there is harmless misinformation, myths and legends that we tell, and the stories are happy stories. They're not big fibs that lead to very serious consequences, and so we do that. So we like to tell stories, but there are certain kinds of stories that are pernicious, and I think this is where you're getting at. The kind of pernicious misinformation would be like the kind that lead to hate, the kind that lead to murder, right? So the 51 Muslims who were murdered in Christchurch, New Zealand, because the perpetrator was very inspired by some information on YouTube. That's not a very good form of misinformation. And then a few months ago, there was this 69-year-old lady who said that she participated in January 6th, the attack on Capitol Hill, because she was hearing stories about how the Democrats were drinking the blood of children, and that the Democrats were turning this country into a communist country. So I think those kinds of misinformation are more pernicious because it leads to murder, it leads to violence, it leads to people getting so angry that they act on their anger.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I believe that that's what you would consider like the worst type of misinformation. And yeah, so now that like we talked about like truth and misinformation, what are some like misinformation in your field, and how do people in your field avoid or tackle these misinformation?
So the kinds of information I'm looking at as a geographer, where are they? Where do you find them? Why are some places more susceptible to misinformation? So, for example, in rural areas, in small towns, certain kinds of misinformation tend to spread. Part of it is just the way you and I think about information, right? So I think that as a geographer, I think of the way we post and we disseminate information. So probably you have a question on technology later on, but just think about it. If I were a professor and I was in a classroom and you were my student, which I would love to have, by the way, and I can control misinformation in a classroom because of the way the classroom is organized in terms of space. Because if you were to ask me, Dr. Poon, are kids' blood being drunk by Democrats? I would correct you on the spot and say, no, Annie, that's not happening, right? So in a classroom setting, it's very clear you have a kind of information flow where somebody can control misinformation. Now, technology has changed that, right? So I'm interested in why. So let's go back to the rural areas and the small towns. What happens in small towns and rural areas are, what's most likely to be your major source of information? Well, it's your friends, it's your family. It's actually Fox News. Fox News is the most important source of information in rural areas. This is not to criticize Fox News. I don't want to get, Fox News all upset. I'm saying that when you have a very narrow number of sources that you can go for information, you can't really check and you can't really corroborate the information. And so with your friends and family, you tend to trust in that information because mom said so, it must be true. My best friend said so, it must be true. And I think about how you and I WhatsApp or text on the phone, right? So I'm thinking, when I'm calling my husband for dinner, instead of going upstairs to his room and saying, it's time for dinner, I just text him and say, come down for dinner, right? Mm-hmm. When I'm traveling and I'm in the airport, somewhere, say in Hong Kong or recently in Munich, for example, my students are texting me and say, can I see you tomorrow? I'm like, no, I'm 5,000 miles away. But they don't get the sense. They think that on social media, on digital space, you're just kind of there all the time. You're just next to them because you can respond to them in real time. If you text me, I can respond to you in the next 5 minutes. And so you think I'm somewhere near you, but actually I'm not. I'm 5,000 miles away, right? So you tend to trust people whom you think are proximate to you, your friends, your family, your colleagues, your teachers, your church friends, for example, your minister. So we find that this kind of a social structure in rural areas, where they get their information from, the inability to have multiple sources to verify if the information is correct, tends to create pockets of misinformation.
Mm. Yeah. So, then what do you think is like something like a regular person can do to like eliminate or like uh avoid misinformation in their life as well as the circle, like the like society, but like just like in their circle or like community.
So for that, let's go back to technology again. This question is quite interesting, right? Um, Social media is 24 hours. It never dies, right? So I may be going to bed at 9 o'clock tonight, but friends and colleagues from Europe, from Asia, they're texting me, they're WhatsApping me. So if I happen to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I open up my phone, well, I have all these messages, right? So in some sense, information in the digital age, you can never shut it off. It's constant, and that's one thing that has changed uh, between now and say 300 years ago. The type of technology that has changed the way we disseminate information, right? So I would say that one of the things we try to think about is how do you slow this down? So when you think about food, there's what we call a slow food movement. So rather than eat fast food like your McDonald's, there's this whole food movement that says that, well, fast food is bad for you because it's not so nutritious. All right. So we got to do slow food because food that is cooked slowly over the table, you have your dinner with your friends, that's more nutritious. So think of information this way: fast information, one that comes and goes really quickly. You forget it 2 hours later when somebody posts something because there's so much information coming. You basically absorb this information like fast food. It's not very high quality, right? So you want to slow down your information. Basically, take time to think about it, to maybe check it out. So to give you an example, a friend of mine said, he very proudly announced to me and said, look, Jessie, I'm not following Fox News. Don't worry. I'm not following CNN either, because both of them, he said, they are very partisan. So he said, I'm going to follow Sky News. And I said, can you verify that Sky News is better than either of the other two? So I said, Google and tell me what Sky News is like, because he thought that because Sky News is from another country, it would be less, it would be more impartial to the reporting of news, right? And then he Googled, and Sky News had succumbed to fake news at certain points as well, right? So I think the idea here is to slow down a little bit when you look at the news and double check it. But for me as well, it's also what social media does to your emotions. So it gets you angry, like the 69-year-old lady who is angry because she thought that people were drinking the blood of kids, or this whole incident around a pizzeria when people were reporting that there were these pedophiles operating in the basement of this pizzeria, and people were so angry about it. Now, I think when you get angry or when you are aroused emotionally over a certain kind of news, that's when you need to slow down, because that's what social media does. It wants you to be angry. It wants you to be emotional. And so if you're emotional, you are clicking on it and going, I hate this, or I like this. right? So then it brings on a different layer of sort of dynamics, right? Because think about it, YouTube has so many so-called experts on it. So 2 weeks ago, my garage door didn't work. So I said, okay, let's go check YouTube and figure out how to fix my garage door. And then there are like 25 experts, so-called experts on YouTube. What do? I look at the number of likes. There were 1 million likes on one of the video. And I say, oh, this must be an expert. I'm going to listen to this guy because 100 or 1 million other people, strangers though, but they like it, it must be correct. The ratings tell me he's an expert, right? But one of the things of social media is it really wants you to push that button. It wants you to say, you like this video. So then you increase your influence. So just because you have 1 million likes doesn't necessarily mean that you are the authority. You just have become very influential in getting people to like your video. And how to get people to like your video? You sensationalize it. You tell a good story. And these days, people prefer a good story. Remember, I said that we are all storytellers and people like to listen to stories. So if you tell a good story on a video, exciting and dramatic, it's more interesting than if I were to pose a series of tables and graphs and try to explain things to you. So my information is dry, is not interesting. But somebody who says the same thing in a series of nice videos and dramas and all that is probably going to be more appealing. So I think when you think about how we respond to certain kinds of information, and then we interact now with non-humans, we're interacting with data all the time, and we're using data to make decisions now. We're saying, oh, 1 million likes, 1 million hearts, that's a good video. That must be a good source of information, right? So these are things I would like us to think about when we think about misinformation and how we get sort of engulfed into that.
Yeah. Um, all right. So, I think you've talked about the invention of technology and its impact on misinformation. And yeah, so those were all my questions about misinformation. I have two more questions just for fun, but do you have anything else you'd like to add before then?
I'm just delighted that somebody like you are you're interested in misinformation, right? If there is anything that appeals to me in my job, it is working with young people, because when I'm now on summer sort of time, which means I don't have to go into the campus and all that. But in fall, when I walk into the campus and I see the 18, 19-year-olds, I'm always energized, because for me, the young are always sort of my sources of my major source actually of inspiration. They're energetic, they're interested in things. And the very fact that you're interested in talking to me about misinformation just makes me feel happy.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's also very inspirational for me to like talk to everyone. Like yeah, I learn a lot from it, so I'm glad that I get to talk to these people about it. All right, so the last two questions are just for fun. So the first one is what inspires you in life? Like what are some of your inspirations? Whether that's like a person, idea, or book. And then yeah.
I think ideas inspire me. So it is good to remain open to various ideas, even sometimes when you think it doesn't sound like an interesting idea. We know that uninteresting ideas 20 years ago may become interesting ideas 20 years later. So for me, what has been inspirational sometimes are these ideas that I get from class from my students. They say, Dr. Poon, have you thought about this? Or Jessie, have you thought about this? And so these little ideas that then, sort of sink into me and go, yeah, it's worth exploring. And then I get so, in some ways, enthusiastic about it. I think those are those are things that really inspire me. Are there people that inspire me? Yeah, lots of people inspire me because, the world has so many good people in terms of advocating for the environment, or advocating to mitigate against misinformation, or advocating against, fossil fuels, or advocating against hate crimes. The world is so filled with so much, for me, optimism, because there are lots of young people, but also not so young people who are participating in sort of this democratic process of trying to get the society to be less imperfect.
Yeah, um, for sure. And do you have any advice for people, especially teens, especially because I know you work with a lot of teens or a lot of young people and yeah, do you have any advice about anything?
I think that young people are very smart. They're technologically very savvy. When I can't figure out my phone, I go to my 10-year-old niece and I ask her, please do this setting for me because I don't know how to do it, right? So I think you're very technologically savvy, and very impressive, in those terms, right? You can figure out things very quickly. But like I said, I think the only advice I have is to slow down when you are clicking away on your phone or on your laptop or on your iPad, and to say, I need nutritious information. Fast information, maybe misinformation. So slow down a little bit, think a little bit more about the information, and then maybe double check it on Google and see and type if the source is credible. And just because, who is this person who's speaking about this issue? Is he or she an authority? Why should I believe this person? And then when your friends post it to you, he or she is probably getting from his or her friends or his or her family. So at the end of the day, you don't know where it's coming from because it's been forwarded many times. So to slow down and consume a bit more nutritious information, I think, is a good way to go.
All right, thank you for that advice and just thank you for this interview, for your time and insights. It was really fun talking to you and I learned a lot and I love the like analogies and everything. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to talk to you even after this interview. I just want to know what it is that you do and why you are interested in this project.
Yeah, of course. I'll stop the recording.